In the previous video we downloaded and installed Polymer version 1.0, and we also touched on the fact that Polymer is made up of lots of different elements, many of which are available in certain packages, for example the Iron Elements package, the Paper Elements package, and so on and so forth. In this video we're going to look at the development patterns necessary to actually include these elements in your web pages. As we saw in the previous video, these packages have been put together by Google based on the types of components contained within each package. You can of course use this website to download individual elements, or indeed all of the elements, but because we're going to be using Bower, we're going to instead download the elements directly from GitHub. All of these elements are available on GitHub at github.com/polymerelements. And a specific repository exists for each individual element. As well as the individual element repositories also exist for the collections. So for example, we can see here is a collection called Iron Elements, and here is one called Paper Elements. And as you would expect, these each contain all of the elements contained within that collection. So if we move across to our terminal window, we can add these repositories to our requirements by typing Bower install Polymer Elements / Iron Elements, and we're also going to add the flag to save. And once this is done, we will also do the exact same thing for the Paper Elements. If we look at our folder now, we can see that within the components folder we have all of these individual elements already downloaded and available to use. We're obviously not going to have a chance to go through all of the elements, but for getting started, downloading the entire package is much easier than downloading individual elements. So once all of those elements are downloaded, the next thing to do is to create a basic template, which is just an index.html file. This is currently just an empty file, and is just going to be used to help demonstrate what elements are and how to use them. So to use Polymer Elements, there are a couple of different steps that we need to take. First off, we need to import the Polymer files as well as the web components.js files. To do this, we simply need to type link rel equals import, and href is the path to our relevant files. So if we look at the Bower components folder, the first thing that we want to import is the web components.js file. There are various different versions of this. For example, a lot of lightweight programs don't actually need the full weight of the shadow DOM behind it. They only need some of the lighter versions, something which Google calls shady DOM. For now, we're just going to import the web components.js file, and that's it located in Bower components. webcomponents.js/webcomponents.js. Once we've imported the web components framework, we can begin to use some of the actual elements that we're going to want to look at. And as a comparison, we're going to create an input field, which is just going to be a type of text. So if we save this and go across to the browser and refresh this page, we'll just see an empty input box, as you would normally expect to see. If we look through the Bower Components directory, we'll see that one of the elements is called Paper Input, which is just an input box as we've just created on the page. but it's stylized in a way to fit in with Google's material design principles. If we head back over to our browser and navigate to Power Components /paper -input -demo, we're actually going to be able to see a whole host of different variations of the input box that we're going to be able to use. So we can see that we have a version here with a label which moves when we begin to type. We can see that we have a password input which censors out all of the information that we're typing in, as well as a whole host of different options. So to actually include one of these elements in our page, within our index.html file, we first need to import the element. This may seem counterintuitive at first, but Polymer as a whole is extremely modular, and so it would be quite wasteful to actually include every single element out of the box. Therefore, the development principle is that you include the element as soon as you want to use it. So to do this, we just need to do something very similar to the web components.js import. Except we're obviously not going to import the web components.js, this time we're going to import paper input, and the file that we're going to include is paper input.html. If we look through our directory, we can see that we have this paper input.html file, as well as a whole host of different versions. For example, we have error versions, containers, character counting, behaviors, and all of these other abilities are all separate to ensure that the page loads for your users as quickly as possible. So in this case, we're just going to import the paper input.html file. We will be looking at the contents of these files later on, and specifically how to create our own versions of these types of files. But for now, all you need to know is that you only need to import the HTML file, and the Polymer will do the rest. So once we've imported the file, under typical web development principles, you would then create something like a div container, which you would then assign a class. And that div container would then inherit all of the properties associated with the class being inherited. That's not how things are done with web components, however. Because we've imported the paper input element, we simply use that element as an element itself. So again, we're just going to create a type of text, just as we did with our sample input box here. And if we save this and go back across to our browser and refresh the page, we can see that we have the elements here, although it doesn't have a border, which makes it slightly confusing. You can see, however, that we do, however, have the properties associated with paper elements. So there is a stylized effect, for example, making this blue line start at the middle and then grow outwards whenever we select the element. If we look at the demo page, we can see that we have these different types as we talked about. We're not limited to having just simple elements with no labels. If we wanted to, for example, add in a label like this version, which hovers above the text when we begin to type text, it's simply a matter of adding a label property. And the contents of this property is what's displayed in that box. So if we go back and refresh again, we see that the label is displayed properly, and as we begin to type, it automatically handles the transition to having the label above the text for us. If we want to go ahead and add multiple labels, particularly using the same paper input property, it's simply a matter of adding more instances of the elements within our code. We don't need to go ahead and actually import it again. It's just like CSS or JavaScript, in that it only needs to be imported the once. So if we add just some numbers to the ends of each of these again and refresh the page, you will note that these labels haven't actually been displayed on the page. This is because, like div tags, you also need to close all of the tags that you open. And this is one of the few differences to a normal input tag, because the normal input tags are self-closing. You don't need to go ahead and have a separate closing tag after an input field. So if we save this with the closed tags, these 4 elements should now show properly. And if we refresh, you can see that they do. So the main points of this video are the fact that web components should be imported first before any of the elements that you're going to use. You then import the elements from the HTML file with the associated element, and you then use the element itself as though it was something like a div tag. It may also be useful to know that each of these elements within the Bower Components directory that we've downloaded does contain a demonstration file. So you can pick pretty much any folder you want and it will have a demo folder containing an index.html file. You will need to have a web server running of some sort to be able to actually see these, because the paths that each demo uses are relative. But by simply going to the Bower Components folder on your web server, then the element's name and then demo, you will be able to see the demonstration file as it's intended to be seen. And of course, if you do spot an element that you want to use, you can look at your page's source code, which will give you an idea of how to go about implementing the desired effect. And one final point before we end this video, it is very beneficial for a performance standpoint to actually include the element just before it's first used, instead of including all of the elements in the head, for example. And this is because of the way that HTTP works, in that it will always go out and try and download all of the separate files associated with the file as soon as it finds a reference to them. And so you don't actually need to import, for example, the paper input element until you're actually going to use it. In the next video, we're going to look at creating a very simple application ourselves, using some of the basic elements contained within the packages that Google provides. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that.